A very good morning, evening, afternoon to all the attendees who are joining us live again for this session from different time zones across the world. I'm Varija Bajaj, convener, National Ability Summit, an initiative by Varija Life. I'm an Indian Asian woman with brown eyes, wheater skin tone, and long brown straight hair. I'm wearing a blue jacket with a bright olive dress against a white background with the logos of Varija Life and National Ability Summit on the left and right corner of the screen. In this session, we would be discussing about disability inclusion in journalism. But why is that even important? Because journalism creates stories and perceptions. Therefore, it becomes a critical part of making inclusion a reality. On that note, allow me to introduce you to this multifaceted moderator for this session, Nikki Hind, founder of Blind Crit and also Australia's first blind fashion designer. She has a vast experience in PR, communication, and event management. Wearing multiple hats, Nikki is also the fashion editor of WB40, and she's covered me in WB40. Thank you, Nikki. For those who don't know or know me best, know that I'm professionally a fashion and an interior designer based here in India with 3 apparel brands. At the first edition of NAS, we touched upon universal clothing and fashion for people with disabilities. Very little that we knew then, that a journey that started with will convert to a business relation. We at Varija Lifestyles are proud to announce that we are the official partners and manufacturers for Blind Grit, a fashion brand by Nikki Hind. While it all started officially last year, Nikki is now an integral part of our core team and mission of inclusion at National Ability Summit. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you so much. My name is Nikki, and yes, I'm so excited to be working with Varija and her team as our manufacturing partners now. Blind Grit, as Varija said, it's a fashion label that's built entirely of and around those who live with disability. So all of the wonderful aspirational jobs that sit behind a fashion label will be done and are done by those who live with disability. And I'm also the fashion editor of fabulous Australian magazine WB40, which stands for Women Beyond 40. For those who cannot see me, I have very fair skin. I think currently I have very red lips because it's about all I can see of myself at the moment. I have red lipstick on. I have long straight blonde hair and a dark blue long sleeve dress on. And behind me are some of the WB40 magazines, and I'm proudly displaying my Vision Australia award as well there.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I would now leave the baton of this session to you and introduce the rest of the panelists.
Absolutely. So don't mind me as I read off here. So today we have with us the fabulous Sarah Richards. Sarah is from Australia. She is currently a journalist and producer with our Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Sarah is an award-winning student journalist working with the ABC. Sarah is passionate about using her own experience as someone with a disability to help advocate for others with disabilities. Just very, very recently, Sarah won Most Outstanding Final Year Journalism Student graduating in 2021 for the whole of Queensland. So welcome, Sarah. Please introduce yourself and describe yourself.
Sarah with 2 photo frames. So nice to meet you. Also, I'm a journalist who's soon to graduate this coming December from university with a journalism and communication. Also, I'm a journalist who's soon to graduate this coming December from university with a journalism and communication degree.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sarah. I didn't realise you hadn't quite, you're winning awards
No.
before you've even quite graduated, you're champion. And we also have the wonderful Lisa Cox, who is also from Australia. Lisa is a media professional, writer, author, and speaker. Lisa says that she's fueled daily by a fierce desire to disrupt the way that disability is represented in popular culture by fusing her professional background in writing, advertising, media, branding, and communications with her acquired disability. So I've actually worked with Lisa, and I'm still working with Lisa. I know she wears many, many different hats as well. As a member of Media Diversity Australia, Lisa also works with journalists and communications professionals to ensure that the media better reflects the diverse community that it serves. Her work has been published both nationally and internationally for publications including the Sydney Morning Herald and HuffPost. With her strong business background, Lisa understands that diversity isn't just the right thing to do, but it also makes excellent financial and economic business sense. So Lisa, please introduce yourself and describe your setting.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Cox. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm wearing a black business jacket. I've got white skin, long blonde hair, and behind me is a very dusty, very full white bookcase full of books and old decrepit ornaments. That's about it.
That's about it. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
I normally put in my alt text when I always put alt text on my Instagram pictures. I'm thinking, what else do I normally include? There's the hair, there's the skin color, and what's behind me. What else should I include? So anything else?
I'm terrible. I never know what to put. I'm terrible. I never know what to put. Never too much. The more description, the better. And we also have the wonderful young Charlotte Bateman. Charlotte is from Albans. Is it Albans or Albans?
It's St Albans, but no one's ever heard of it anyway. It's near London.
I've heard of St Albans. I'm so sorry. See that this
really?
Yeah, I've heard of St Albans, but I didn't see the ST beforehand, so I have, but I've been to Ireland and England. And we're very English here in Australia, really. So St Albans in England. And Charlotte has experience writing for national publications and working to the tight deadlines of fast-paced newsrooms, such as The Mirror and The Telegraph. She's recently completed NCTJ training, which I don't rightly know what that is. I don't know if that's because I'm Australian and not English, or because I just haven't completed the training.
It's just our journalism training in England, basically. So it's
okay. So is that national? What's it stand for?
Industry sort of like standard qualification, really.
Yep, excellent. With the Press Association, and she is now working full-time as a reporter for Sky News, currently working on the production of the Daily Climate Show. Whilst her work covers a wide variety of news, she's particularly interested in investigative journalism and human interest stories, with an emphasis to expose the truth. So yes, please introduce yourself and describe where you are.
Hi everyone. So I've got fair skin, sort of mid-length, light brown hair, which I've got in a ponytail today. And then I've got some quite, how would I describe it? Sort of like shimmery silver eyeshadow. And then I'm wearing, because I love pink, I'm wearing a bright pink ruffly kind of blouse. Yeah, and behind me is not that interesting. It's just a wall really and a bed. So yeah, this is the work from home lifestyle.
The all-important home office look.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Now, I might kick off with you, Sarah, with how do you feel about the current disability narrative in journalism? Are we getting it right? Are we getting it wrong? I'm sure it's somewhere in between. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear your perspective, especially given that, well, I thought you had just finished, but you're still finishing. You're in that academic world still, learning what one would hope would be the cutting edge of what journalism is to become. Yeah, so I'd really love to hear, yeah, what you think of the current disability narrative within the journalism industry.
Yeah, so I think currently we have come a long way. Are we there yet? Definitely not. There's so much that still needs to be done. And like from my experience as a student, so I'm graduating December. It's something that is taught, but not at many universities in Australia, from my understanding. So there's definitely a gap, and it's just not with like disabilities, also other minority groups. We're not really taught how to represent them well. So I've been very fortunate with my own experience to understand how I feel, and knowing how I've been represented in articles, and knowing that that's not okay. Was there very thankful that I had a good lecturer who was very onto it about the wording and how we represented them, and they're not inspirational stories. But out of my 4 years, that was like one course, so it's definitely something that's not emphasized enough, I think. And I think there's definitely a lot to go, and if we're not training our journalists up to teach that when we get into the industry, especially with a lot of old school journalists, they're still not always representing us well. I see so many articles all the time from various publications. I'm like, oh, you shouldn't have said that, or just the way that they represented them, and the stories that they're telling as well. Like, there's so many untold stories of people with disabilities that people wouldn't ever think of telling, and just missing out on so many opportunities. So definitely a lot to come.
And that's really interesting, because when I did journalism, that will be about 15 years ago now, there was absolutely no mention of inclusive anything, not for, perhaps a little bit for culture, different cultures, a little tiny bit, but no mention of disability. So I find that interesting that there's
so it's slowly seeding in. I mean, we had it was a really good course. It was about social justice journalism, and we had one whole week dedicated to people with disabilities and how to report on them, which was so good. I loved that week. I was very engaged in it. But I think we need to do more of that and practice it more regularly as well, because I mean, that was in my second year of uni, so I'm 2 years later, I'm graduating, so there still needs that little bit more.
So it was just that one time in your second year?
Yeah, just for 1 week. So it's good, little baby step, but definitely a long way. We looked at other groups as well and how they've been represented, but I still think definitely a long way to go. And from my understanding, that course isn't offered at many universities, that type of course. So it's very unique to my university as well. So it's very rare still to be taught it.
Yeah, that just really surprised me that it's so rare, because we're just about to release, for the first time ever, a handbook that's a collaboration between journalists and people with disabilities. So those sorts of things have been released before by people with disabilities only, but this is a really collaborative effort between working journalists and people with disabilities. And it's the first time ever that this sort of thing has been produced. And that in itself is a bit disgusting, that it's a great handbook, but it's terrible that it's taken to this point in time to be produced, and it's a really, really great resource, and I'm very, very proud of the team behind it. I'm very proud to be on that team. So it's going to be launched in a couple of weeks, but it's 2021. So
And how long has journalism been around?
yeah.
I wonder if having resources like that, Lisa, will help universities feel more confident about it. I wonder partly if it's a confidence thing. And Lisa, I'll be asking you a little bit later around language and the types of things you're doing there, because sometimes I think there's a hesitancy in general socially in saying the wrong thing, and of course journalism is all about what you say, so there's perhaps a level of that as well, and maybe more universities will put up their hand to be more inclusive once they've got this resource that they can actually use. So what university was it, Sarah, or is it rather?
Oh yeah, so I'm at the University of Queensland, so they definitely emphasized teaching more about that, but obviously there's so much more we can do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, Charlotte, what do you think about the current disability narratives, the stories that are told? There's we were when we were meeting with the NAS team in the lead up to this, we were talking about that disability sweet spot that people really like. They're disabled people to look disabled enough. They're not that into what I would call invisible disability. I think I have an invisible disability. I don't think I look disabled. But they're not so disabled that it makes people feel uncomfortable. Do you think the narrative is still quite focused around that sweet spot?
I definitely would agree with that. I think there's still this image that a disabled person is in a wheelchair, and obviously, like you said, a lot of disabilities are invisible, whether that be visual impairment, hearing impairment, autism, etc. So I think, that definitely is very underrepresented, I think. And I think I would say we are sort of still using this idea of inspiration porn in journalism a lot. So a lot of the stories are focused, instead of on the person themselves, it's on what challenges they've had to overcome. But I think while sometimes there might be a story there, because there might be a story there if someone has overcome challenges, but it's looking at the other aspects of their life as well, not just the fact that they have a disability. So for example, something that me and quite a few other disabled female journalists at the moment are doing in the UK is we're trying to really open up the conversation about violence against women, but violence against disabled women, because obviously it's a huge topic all around the world right now, but particularly here in the UK with, I'm sure you heard about the stories with Sarah Everard and our police forces at the moment. So I think it's about finding stories that are, not just about the disability, but about them being a woman, or just about any other aspect of their life as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. I completely agree. And Charlotte, just so as people can look it up, because I know it and it's amazing, could you tell us where to find that project and the name of it that you're working on?
Yeah, so I launched this campaign outside of Sky. So this isn't attached to Sky, but it's a campaign called Mark My Words, which is basically a news platform where victims of abuse from all different backgrounds, whether that be disability, minority ethnic groups or LGBT, about their experiences with the police. It's something that I became a survivor of sexual violence and coercive control last year, and I've sort of seen firsthand how the police treat disabled victims. So that's something that I've tried to take. Obviously, it's, you know, like, it's been a difficult year, but also it's been like quite eye-opening for me as a journalist, because I've been able to see in the sort of like, I've had my investigative hat on quite a lot, while, you know, because I'm being able to see inside, which hopefully will help me be able to report on these issues a bit more, you know, sensitively and with empathy going forward. So that's one plus I'm seeing of it. But yeah, so it's called Mark My Words, the campaign.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, it's incredible. I have seen it. Thanks, Charlotte. Now, Lisa, I will direct this one firstly at you. Are there any particular media genres or segments, for example, the glossy fashion magazines, the major ones, or is it radio or TV, investigative, or, you know, scientific, financial? Do you think there are any particular genres or segments of journalism that are more resistant to disability inclusion?
Okay, all of it in its own way. So just yes, it's all nuanced. So yes, all of it in its own way, to just put a blanket statement over that. I suppose if we look at something like fashion, obviously you have a background in that, and you and I have spoken at length about this previously, and we both know that there's a long history of disability not being represented in fashion. In Australia, for the first time ever, disability finally made it into Fashion Week this year, and that took who knows how long. It's too long, but that was great. And what I would like to see, though, is conversations around disability in the media, for example. And this is something we talk about in the Disability Reporting Handbook. So when journalists are reporting on disability, not just including conversations about disability when it's for wheelchairs or disability related. We have something in Australia called the NDIS, so disability support schemes and disability related matters. But if you're talking about climate change or the Melbourne Cup or the football, or I don't know, whatever the big thing is in your particular country, interview someone with a disability, because the chances of them having an opinion on fashion, politics, whatever the case may be, is particularly high. As I've said before, I can't walk, but I can shop. And, you know, there's plenty of other things I have an opinion on other than wheelchairs and disability and prosthetics and, you know, the colour of hospital gowns. So as journalists and as media people, even, you know, finance and those sorts of things, including people with disabilities, they're home buyers as well. So just incidentally including people with disabilities into those sorts of stories, it can be seamless inclusion. Doesn't have to be a big deal, because people with disabilities buy homes every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Lisa, yes, you and I are in the fashion world, and I regularly just reach out to, you know, people at the, you know, the main magazines, and, you know, the umbrella organisations that look after all those magazines, because I'm so keen for them to have, well, somebody with a disability just on their board, so far as the, you know, the umbrella organisations, or even know if there are people in their editing room that have lived experience of disability.
That's
and
correct. Sorry.
I don't hear back. I do not hear back, and I see. I have to say, as a consumer of media, I don't see many journalistic stories about disability, except for, as you say, the inspiration form, the fabulous inspirational story. Well, sorry, Lisa, continue.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. This morning I was in a boardroom meeting, but it was just via Zoom, so I weren't really in boardroom. But it was about a fashion week that's coming up, and I'm a panelist for a fashion week. And we're talking about a particular fashion magazine, and a particular group of fashion magazines, and tokenism. And they will put a black model or a disabled model or a model from a minority on the cover or in the pages and tick that diversity box, but it's not holistic diversity. And so they don't have disabled people on the board or in the staff room or wherever it is throughout the organisation. They might just plonk one on the runway or in the pages of the magazine or whatever the case may be, as you were alluding to earlier. So, and this is something I do talk about in my presentations and write about as well in some of the work that I do, whether it is in fashion or business or something else, really getting down to that holistic diversity and inclusion, rather than just having that tokenistic tick box, stick a disabled person in and look really good, stick it, throw out a press release and look great. It's much more than that.
It is much more than that, and I think it's quite apparent in so far as we all seem to agree that the majority of journalism around disability still is on that inspiration porn. So that's not incidental. That's not that's not inclusive. So when you were, I guess as a student even, did you feel that there were going to be areas that were less welcoming of disability inclusion when you were going to go out in the workforce? Sarah, sorry. Sorry, Sarah.
That's okay. I was a bit hesitant about entering journalism because I remember when I was applying for universities, I had a few people say to me like, "Oh, you can't be a journalist, you have a disability. You never see those types of people on TV or anything." I still applied. I mean, I haven't graduated and I already have a job. So, I mean, it worked out for me anyway. But so it just made me more determined. So I was a bit hesitant going into some places and seeing what stories they produce. Would they just see me as that token? I've been very fortunate in my workplace though. I mean, they really value me. So I've been really, very lucky in that regard. So
I am so excited. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say this. I am so excited, Sarah, that you are doing what you are doing, because that is exactly the same response that I got when I acquired my disabilities after I had already been working in media, and I re-entered the media workforce and was told, "What are you doing? You can't be in media. You've got disabilities now. Look at you." So I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Back to you.
No, it's exciting, isn't it? I know. And look, I had the same experience, but with fashion. You can't do this, and neither can they, as in the disabled people that are joining me in blind grit. And Charlotte, be interested to know if you had the same. What did people say when you told them you're doing journalism?
I mean, I was very lucky because my college press association, I had an amazing experience with them actually, and I think one of the great parts of PA is that all of our lecturers are journalists, so they were very encouraging of me. It was more at school, I think. There was more of a skepticism from careers advisors, I would say. I don't know about other sort of education systems around the world, but in the UK, there's still this sort of so not, you know, it's not everywhere, but there is an assumption that if you're blind, the two jobs that you can do are physiotherapy or piano tuning. And you know, I'm tone deaf and like can't hold a note to save my life, and I like don't really, you know, physiotherapy really does not appeal to me. So yeah, but no, in terms of journalism, yeah, I think there was because I applied for like apprenticeships, so I think there was a sort of perception that, oh, they're very competitive, you know, is this the right path for you? But I think, like Sarah said, like it just definitely motivates you more to prove them wrong, really. So in a way, it can actually be a good thing because it makes you more career driven, I think.
I think so too. It did for me as well. Sounds like it did for Sarah, and I know it does for Lisa. So Charlotte, just so far as that last question, I happen to know that you did a wonderful article that was commissioned by Teen Vogue, but did not end up in Teen Vogue. So in relation to that last question, have there been sections of the media that you find less embracing of a disabled journalist or journalism around disability?
I would say in terms of, I think being I can't speak as being a freelancer because I've only like did it for like a very like I've only pitched, you know, did that for quite a short period of time, so I definitely probably not the right person to answer that. But when I did do freelancing, I think yeah, I think it did take a lot to convince the editor that you were you know, just as good as any other freelancer. I think that when you're in a workforce, they can see you working, they meet you, so they can see, you know, that you're confident, you're articulate, you're outspoken. So I think that gives them confidence. But when you're freelancing, it's pitching over email. So I think that they've got this perception of, oh, you know, is this going to be, you know, is this going to be a good piece of writing? I think that I would say as well with disabled people, just generally, not just in journalism, but there is an assumption that you'd be less intelligent. I'm not very academic at all, but I love to write. But I think, yeah, there is an assumption that, I don't know if you found this, Nikki, but when you're visually impaired, people are like, oh, well, how would they write? That, you know, there doesn't seem to be this understanding that there is sort of technology, which means we can, you know, just pretty much do anything really. But yeah, I think I would just add about so Teen Vogue was obviously fashion. Well, I pitched this to the fashion editor of Teen Vogue, and I would probably say from what I've experienced, which is not very much at all compared to Sarah and Lisa, but from what I have seen is that the part of journalism that seems most resistant is women's magazines, and I don't know if that is because as disabled women we are seen as less than other women. I'm not sure why it is, But I definitely think with fashion, there's still this stereotype that if you're disabled, you're not stylish, you're not attractive, you're undesirable, which is excuse my language, but obviously it's absolute bollocks. And I think the problem with that stereotype is that some editors might think you wouldn't be able to write about fashion. Another one I would say as well would be sort of like women's health, sex, that sort of thing. I think it would be great. Personally, I would love to see more disabled female journalists writing about sex and that sort of thing. I think that would be brilliant.
Oh, I agree. Nice. Yeah, I absolutely agree, Charlotte. That is beautifully put. Thank you, because that's that's where I see the greatest reluctance with the women's magazine, and sex and health and desirability.
I know plenty of disabled women with kids, and I don't know how they arrived.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And Charlotte, I'm actually going to continue with you. I'm going to ask you initially this question too. Do you feel that you consume media differently to people who don't have a disability? And has that impacted how you create media, or journalism rather?
I would say generally speaking, no, just because of now that everything's digital, it means that, it is so much more accessible news consumption to all readers and all viewers actually. I can access any article really online now, but I think what I would say is in broadcasting, something that I have noticed in myself is when I'm watching a TV report, I can't see what's going on the screen. So everything that I'm getting from the story is based on the audio and the reporter. So I think when I'm sort of like, I don't do any on screen stuff myself, but when I'm sort of behind the scenes producing a TV report, I like to think of it as kind of like visual radio. So like, obviously the report is going to be visual because that is a huge part of TV, and just because I can't see doesn't mean I don't agree that pictures and footage and graphics are really important in journalism. I can completely see that. So it's about using that, but also the report itself has to be self-explanatory through listening. So if I'm sort of commissioning a graphic and a TV report, I think it's really important that if like all channels could maybe sort of make sure that the reporter is really explaining the data in that graphic, so that even if you can't see what's going on the screen, everything is self-explanatory. Because I'm not sure, I can't speak for all countries because I don't know, but I mean, I'd be very surprised if they did. But in the UK, we don't obviously have audio description on news channels, which would kind of be a bit weird if we did. I'm not going to lie, it would sound a bit weird. But yeah, I think it would be great if reporters can really be conscious that when they're when they're reporting on a story, making sure that everything they're saying is completely, you can get the whole story from listening as well as the visuals going around at the same time.
That's wonderful. Imagine if all news channels did that, how wonderful that would be. And so much better than audio description. Yeah, that would just be weird. I wouldn't want to listen to that as a blind consumer of the news either. But to describe the story so as you can actually picture it in full.
I think it's so important because obviously, especially in this pandemic, the news has kind of been like a, as well as the NHS and all the, nurses across the world, journalists have played I think they've been heroes during this pandemic because they've been constantly informing the public. So I think it's really, really important that all viewers can fully access the news that they're watching, so that they're fully informed, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Sarah, so do you think you consume media differently to mainstream society, and does that affect how you create the journalism that you create?
I think I do, because I intentionally seek out stories about people with disabilities, or like anything relating to like our situations with like the NDIS, which is like our National Disability Insurance Scheme. With algorithms, there's lots of filter bubbles. So I think I definitely get caught up in that. In my side of my communication degree, I just produced like a short podcast about it, and I analyzed what my feed was on Facebook versus like the actual like bulletin, and I kept getting like disability stories and like stories about my area. So I found that really interesting, because I would assume people in my cohort wouldn't receive those stories like me. So I think I definitely consume it differently, because I'm very much engaged in that topic. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with like social media. So
that is so interesting. Yeah, because of course, you know, you'd have to say the majority of people don't have a disability, because it's 20%, so 80% don't. So, and if they're not very engaged and they're not looking at those things, and it doesn't even get fed into their pathway, it doesn't even get, you know, hey, have a look at this. That's a really good point, Sarah. Thanks. Lisa, what about you? How do you consume media differently, if you do at all, and how does it affect what you put out there to the world and how you put it out?
With regard to mainstream, say TV or something, no different. I'm a reality TV junkie, so get caught up in The Bachelor and things like that. Watch all of those things no differently, and don't particularly seek out anything different. But as Sarah was saying, algorithms play a big role in the media I consume, and I get fed a lot of different things purely based on my searches, and I may have been looking for wheelchairs or something, and based on that, I'll get extra things, even though I don't have a big interest in wheelchairs. I may have, you know, I'll be new one every 5 years. That's just an example. But as Sarah mentioned, algorithms play a huge part in social media on the content that I'm fed. But as a general rule, it really doesn't play a huge part in the sort of content I consume. However, given that I identify my disabilities, I do see things through a new lens these days. So I was 24 when I acquired my disabilities, and I wouldn't want to say I was this completely different person, but obviously after everything that happened, I wouldn't lie and say that nothing had changed. So you do see things through a new lens, and having that lived experience certainly makes me see things differently and appreciate things differently. So that's how I'm consuming my media these days.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And I guess what nicely leads on from that, from those answers, is how, and I'll ask you this first, Sarah, how do you think the rise of influencers in favour of traditional regulated journalism affects how disability stories are told? You know, because it's a lot of, well, you know, do you think it's that, you know, beauty over brains, and, you know, outrage over informed, balanced opinion, and basically the kind of loudest, shiniest over kind of compassionate, relevant, rational, which kind of ties in to what you were saying about what people get fed, given what the news that they get fed, because the influencers, and you're one, Lisa. You could all be influencers for all I know. I never look at them. I only know because I don't know. I just know you are, Lisa, but I don't follow influencers. Sarah, rather.
So I do think like the media in general does have the tendency to like promote stories that are like very clickable and like do well by sharing. And often these stories are either like super inspirational, look at them overcoming their disability, versus like, oh, let's feel sorry for them. So they very much, those two stories do well because they're shareable. And so I feel like some media organizations just want to go, oh, let's do this and keep doing this. And I think by doing that, they miss out on all of these like really unique stories about people with disabilities, and just they don't show them for like actual people, and don't show them as like, oh, they do this job, they're a researcher, they're an educator, they're a mom. Like they don't go into deeper into that, and can be super dangerous because when we read these stories, they influence policies. People read them. Like I produced a story this year about online dating, but people with disabilities, well, especially women, experiencing harassment and their stories. So the researcher I interviewed for it said she'd never considered, like her research is about minority groups, and she's never even thought of looking at people with disabilities, even though we're the largest minority group. So she's now like dedicating more research into that because of the story. So to me, like that's what I consider good journalism, is when you have something that flows afterwards. So, because they missed out on those stories, it's just like, oh, people don't think people with disabilities can date and aren't on online dating seeking for love because they don't see us as those people. So having that story just changes how people go, oh, actually they are seeking for love, oh, and they're actually having bad experiences, why aren't apps looking after them? Like it raises many more questions. So I think stories like that can be more powerful than just the inspirational ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we protect that in a world that is increasingly heading towards that quick, superficial, super shiny, either outrage or heartbreak story? How, as a student, because I guess you would know kind of what I guess just graduating now, what are the universities teaching in terms of keeping the industry, the authentic nature of the industry alive and happening? Because to me it feels like there's a real risk of so many people I know just don't listen to what I would consider quality journalism at all, don't see it, look at it at all. How do we protect that, do you think?
I guess that's a hard question. I think definitely not too sure. I think there's a lot of things that need to be done, but I think having more diversity in the newsroom is definitely a big way to start that, and just having different voices, because we start to seek different stories as well from different perspectives.
Can I answer this as well from another perspective, just to jump in? My professional background is in advertising and marketing. So I work in advertising agencies as a copywriter for many years, creating ads, TV, radio, magazine ads for international and national brands until I acquired my disabilities. And so I'm really passionate about bringing diversity and representation of disability into advertising. So not just into newsrooms, but advertising is really my sweet spot, and I can talk to you all day about if you give me the time. But so yes, we can absolutely talk about the importance of journalism, but having that representation in a, I don't know, let's say McDonald's ad, I'm just making this up, but if 5 people are sitting at the table, why doesn't one of them have a disability? Just there's an example. But having those really, really just incidental inclusions. Normalising disability is what I'm trying to say, but bringing that not just into journalism, but into marketing and advertising as well, is another way that we can address this issue where we have only pity porn and the extremes of the stereotypes coming out, where it's the really inspirational person or the really pitiful person, and stories about disabled people only when they're at Paralympics. So it's not just journalism that can play a role, it's marketing and advertising that can play a really crucial role as well.
Which essentially influencers, that's what they're doing. They're their own brand advertising, I guess. So, you know, I mean, I essentially look at influencers as marketing and advertising. That's a good point, Lisa. So, you know, there's definitely value in the superficial and then the depth, because people are, a larger majority of people are going to see the superficial and the quick and the snappy incidental stuff with the big brands that we're all familiar with, whereas, you know, as we're saying, that you have to actually kind of be looking for the deeper stories that cover disability in depth. So both will complement each other.
A news story, a story needs something to happen for a story to be written. So instead of waiting for something to happen, an advertisement, on the other hand, someone with a disability can be included as talent without needing a news story or something good or bad to happen. That can just happen tomorrow. For people with disabilities to be included as talent. And I've worked in agencies, I've worked on production shoots. I know how easy these things are. So I'm not just suggesting this, knowing that it's impossible. I know this can be done. I've been there. I've done these things.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. So Charlotte, how do you feel about that? You know, the increasing world of the, you know, people getting their information and their stories and their, you know, their attitudes and narratives from influencers. They're stories that they believe from influencers, increasingly over journalists.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be quite dangerous, especially with social media, and I think, you know, like, I'm sorry I'm repeating what you're saying, Lisa, but it's such a good point that brands, you know, they have a role, you know, they need to have responsibility in what they're representing, because at the end of the day, people do look to these brands, and that's where they're going to form a lot of their ideas. I just wanted to add that I think, as well as brands, I think it would be great to see more disabled people in roles of kind of like what we've spoken before about, Nikki, in terms of the fashion industry. It'd be great to see more disabled people in decision-making roles. But what I'd love to see is more disabled people in editorial roles across journalism. Because I think what is so, obviously reporters, you know, we can pitch a story, but at the end of the day, we do have very little power, because it's not us who decides what goes in the finished newspaper or the finished magazine. So I think it's about, you know, editors are huge influencers, because they are filtering and choosing what news, what makes the news. So I think it would be great to see more disabled people in those influential editorial roles across, and that's why I think it's so, you know, I think it's brilliant that, you know, with you know, with WB40, you're able to make sure that all women are represented, and that comes from, you know, being in that editorial role. I think it brings a lot of power.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So do I. And I was yeah, I fully agree. As you know, yes, Charlotte and I have spoken about this. Like, you could talk about advertising forever, Lisa. I could talk about the importance of people with disability being in those decision-making roles. I just don't think you can have genuine inclusion in journalism or any other industry unless you have your lived experience people in the decision-making roles in a proportionate manner, in a demographical proportionate manner. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Charlotte, while I've got you, do you feel like the token journalist at your workplace?
The
token disabled journalist. I'm so sorry. The token disabled journalist.
I don't. I think I did. I came into Sky. I was 18 when I joined, so I wasn't particularly academic, and I did feel, I think I had imposter syndrome. I thought, did I get here just because of my disability? Am I really good enough? But no, I mean, I would say the way they've treated me is the exact opposite. They do value my ideas, and they do include me in everything. But I think I would say the problem with these diversity schemes, as much as they're brilliant, it is kind of missing the point, because sort of by setting yourself a goal of, right, we need to employ this many people from minority ethnic groups, this many people disabled, that's really not the point. What they need to be focusing on is merit, who is best for the job. So, dispelling all these preconceptions about the person completely, and then completely focusing on their talent, because I think because I don't think personally diversity does bring different ideas, but I think at the end of the day, in order to be quality journalism, it's about talent. So yeah, I mean, I would say on broadcasting there is definitely a problem with not enough disabled people on screen, and that comes from the whole, especially as women, with a lot of presenters and reporters on screen. It's this we want promote this image of being glamorous, desirable, and obviously, even though we are glamorous, sexy, desirable, the stereotypes of disabled people don't agree with that, and that's why we're often ignored, even though we do fit the image of TV. But I would say, I think Lisa mentioned this earlier, it's I have found myself being asked a lot, oh, can you look into this story? Can you do this story which is to do with disability? Now, I'm very interested in disability, but I want to make sure that as a journalist, that is not my only thing that defines me. I want to be an all-rounder. So I think it's about when it becomes tokenism is when you're only using that person to talk about disability. But when you're including them in all aspects of journalism, all aspects of reporting, that's when you're using them for their talent, not for who they are.
Beautifully said, Charlotte. Yeah, I very much agree. And I presume that maybe happens in quite a few, particularly image-driven industries with disability. I know for myself, in fashion, there's a presumption that I design adaptive clothing for people with disabilities, that I only design for people with disabilities. I don't actually design adaptive clothing at all. So yeah, as soon as you tell somebody, I'm a fashion designer and I'm blind, there's a presumption that it's all about the disability. Yeah, I don't know if that happens in industries like finance and science. I'm not at all sure, but I certainly see it a lot in anything that's quite image driven, like media journalism, that there's a presumption that you're the one to go to for anything disabled, and that's your specialty, and that's all you know.
Yeah.
how about, you, Lisa? And
oh no,
you're,
sorry, I was going to say we've talked about this at length at Media Diversity Australia, only because if just to use yourself as an example, if that person was to go to somebody else and give the disability story to a non-disabled person, then to play devil's advocate, they'd be criticised for, or the non-disabled journalist would be criticised hypothetically for writing about something when they didn't have the lived experience. So you're potentially damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's a bit of a tricky one.
It's so true, because I've been working on this piece. I was interviewed for it, so I didn't write it myself, for Cosmo, and the journalist who was amazing journalist. The way she interviewed me, she completely understood. I could see she was very, she was just very clued up. She wasn't disabled, but she, Cosmo have now had a complaint that she's not disabled, so she cannot write about VAWG with regard to disabled women. But I think the point I would argue is that as long as the case studies, and at the end of the day, it's about their story. So as long as they are happy with how their story has been, as long as I would say the interviewees are able to read their story and that they're happy with it editorially, I personally think it's going to become dangerous if we start saying that you can't write about that because you don't have that lived experience, because otherwise we're going to make it that these stories are not going to make the mainstream media because people are going to be terrified of reporting on them.
Good point. Yeah.
absolutely.
I
agree,
just want to add with that, I feel like, because I've done a few stories for like uni and stuff, and writing about people with disabilities, even I'm a bit anxious about as well, because I want to make sure that they're represented, because I have like a physical disability. That's my experience. So I did a story featuring like people with invisible disabilities, and I was like a bit anxious writing about that because that's something that I haven't personally lived with. So if we get like onto it, can get like really, really complicated. As long as I think the talent feels comfortable with how they're represented, that they feel like their voice was heard, that's, I think, the main thing that needs to be done in journalism.
That's a great point, Sarah. Yeah, that's very true. And of course, again, people think that because you have a disability, perhaps you can represent disability. And I've got no idea what it's like to use a wheelchair. That so there's those things, and as you say, it can get more and more dangerous and more kind of small groups. And the delightful thing about the story that you were telling there, Charlotte, which I'm a huge advocate of, is the lovely learning. We want it all to be journalism, because if we've only got disabled people talking to other disabled people, telling stories about disabled people, then there's not that lovely learning, and the connection. And now now you've had the privilege of telling the story of this person, and you understand and you have empathy, and there's that, to me, that connection and that learning is crucial, and there's nowhere near enough of it in society. Hence the discomfort often in speaking to people with disability, about people with disability. That's nice, nicely put.
Personally, I'm not transgender, so I would be nervous currently, and I haven't got that much experience, so as a journalist, so I would be nervous to write about transgender issues, but I really want to learn, and I want someone to teach me, and that comes from interviewing and listening to the person. I think a sign of a good journalist is having an open mind and just retelling what you've been told, and not trying to change the way it's been said to you.
Absolutely.
I've said so many times before, I spent the first 24 years of my life walking on eggshells and thinking, oh dear, I don't want to offend anyone. What do I write? How do I say it? Oops. And now I see people coming towards me terrified, thinking, you can see the look of just terror in their eyes, thinking, how do I say it? I want to choose the right words, not say the wrong thing. And I think, oh gosh, they feel like I once did. So now a lot of the work I do is trying to bridge that gap between them and us. As Varija said when she introduced us, to really try and those two silos. I don't like that there's a them and an us. I really want to try and bridge that gap a little bit. And the media and advertising, marketing, communications can play such an important role in that, which is great that we're talking about this evening.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Lisa. And I've got just a couple more questions. One of them, Lisa, is about language, which I know is very much in your realm. You are excellent on this point. It's something that always frightens me, and I am a person with a disability. It is an absolute minefield, I think. You know, people with disability get outraged about it. People without disability get outraged about it. I actually couldn't care less, personally. For me, I don't care what you call me. And for me, it's about the you know, the motivation behind the language. And I feel like there is currently such a social worldwide fear, because there's a push to talk about it, present it, disability, but it's like the language, because we're not used to using it, and we're very politically correct, as I'm sure we should be. You know, there's just like this state of freeze. How do we balance the language? Because to me, just the more normalized, the more talked about, the more out there it is, the better. With, you know, the more talked about it is with compassion, respect, understanding. You know, how do we best deal with the fear and the anxiety around the language as journalists? Sarah. I see Sarah's eyes go, oh my God,
sorry.
don't ask me,
I
it's too
thought
hard.
Lisa was answering. So with language, I think, I mean, whenever I get interviewed by people like journalists, I always kind of like give them like rules, like, oh, this is how I want to be represented. Please don't refer to my like disability as this, just so that they have a clear understanding of what I feel comfortable with. So I feel like I would definitely recommend that for anyone with disabilities that ever going to be used as talent, is just be really open with them like that. Also, as a journalist, it's okay to ask like in a respectful way and go, oh, if you're comfortable with me like sharing this, like that's okay. And just be prepared to, if they say yes or no, just take it as it is. And I think if you're like, as a journalist, ever engaging with someone with a disability, just like be conscious of how to respect them as well, because some people with disabilities, if they have like very chronic fatigue as their part of their condition, just be aware of that and just managing your time and making sure that, oh, I've said yes to this time, I'll be there at this time because this person's making an effort for me. So just being understanding of like conditions around them to make sure they're comfortable. And then, yeah, if you're open and respectful, you can have a good conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Sarah. Charlotte, how do you deal with, and how do you, you know, what do you see in your work with Sky around the language with disability? Is there fear and anxiety, or is it improving that fear? Are people getting a little more used to it?
I would say, as in general, there is a huge fear. Just not even just about disability, about any taboo subject, really, about the terminology. I mean, just to give you an example, I had a male editor take the word vagina out of one of my articles because they thought it was too, and that's a biological, you know, body part. So I mean, I think, yeah, there is a huge fear, which comes from probably just being scared to learn, really. I I'm kind of like you, Nikki, as a reader, I really don't really care how, you know, if someone's interviewing me, I personally, as long as my story is being told how I want it to be told, I'm not too worried about the terms, and I think it's a personal thing, because it's what the person's comfortable with. But I think there's a danger of focusing on the words and not the story, and I mean, I just think personally, I'm not particularly PC. Like, I will say things without, you know, I'll say things and I think, oh God, you know, probably shouldn't have said it like that. And that's just the way I am. I'm quite opinionated. But I think it's about sort of not being worried to get it wrong. And I think as readers and as viewers, we need to sort of like realize that people are learning, and not to have this huge outrage and to, you know, this cancel culture of a journalist. I think it is a dangerous thing because, you know, it's about motivation and intention. Like you said, Nikki, it's about that journalist is, you know, they got it wrong, but they are trying to get this story into the media. And I think if you get so het up on the language, it means that these hard subjects won't even, you know, make it into mainstream media.
Yeah.
I just want to like add to that. I saw this article, I think 2 months ago. It was about like people with disabilities and employment, and the whole article didn't feature one voice of a person with a disability. Yeah, and it was really poorly written. It kind of made like, it had phrases like, oh, it was our choice that we made the workplace difficult, kind of thing. So I saw it get shared around, and I decided to message the person who wrote it, and we had like a really good conversation, really respectful, saying like why I didn't like the article and how it made me felt. And she was like really understanding about it, and spoke to her editor the next day, and they rewrote the article and included people's voices as well. And it was much better, because like having articles like that circulate, if an employer goes, oh, someone with a disability wants to work here, oh, I don't know how to experience that, and that's an article that they see, I mean, that's just going to be really misrepresenting us. So I think, you know, just being respectful, if they're having this, if there's someone making this article, just telling them in a nice way what's wrong about it and why it's important to have our voices in it. I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, that
Excellent.
just sounds like really bad journalism, to be honest. I mean, like, not even, yeah, interviewing the people who it's about. I mean, that's just so stupid.
Yeah. Lisa, well, I think of you as our language expert. That's yeah.
Talk too much. That's why. Like you, I'm not particularly PC in a lot of ways, but I've had my disability now for 16 years roughly, and over that time I've probably learned more over the years. So in the beginning I really didn't know much at all, but in the last several years I've learned really that what is acceptable and what's not. So things like wheelchair bound and confined to a wheelchair are two things that really do rub me up the wrong way, and I hear them frequently in the media by journalists who just don't know any better. And that's one reason why we put the handbook together, is that journalists don't go out of their way to be horrible. They just don't know any better a lot of the time, and they genuinely do want to say and do the right thing. They're not horrible people. And I've been a writer, but I've also been the subject of more stories recently. So like Sarah, I've tried to say, listen, this is probably how I'd like to be referred to as, but or this is probably the language you'd like to use, but journalists don't always like to be told how to write. So as I've discovered, but as as Nikki said before, well, like Nikki, I'm not particularly precious about language, even though I'm a bit precious about language sometimes. I'm not precious about my own language and what people get called, or what people call me, sorry, because even though I do advocate a lot for the disability sector, I realise that I'm only one person, and so never ever assume. That's the one piece of advice. If you don't remember anything else from today, shame on you. But if you remember nothing else from today, remember that don't ever assume. I'm one person, Sarah's one person, we're all just one voice, and there's millions more disabled people out there who all have different lived experiences. So just because they've heard from me as a wheelchair user doesn't mean the next wheelchair user you speak to is going to have the same experience. And that's what we try to tell the journalists as well. Don't assume that the next wheelchair user or person with a prosthetic or a brain injury or something is going to be anything like the last interviewee.
Absolutely. Somebody that both you and I know, Lisa, the wonderful Carol Taylor. I remember her telling me a story about being interviewed, and the person interviewing her refused to call her wheelchair bound, and Carol refers to herself as wheelchair bound, and she says to me, because she's very funny, she says, you know, if I could bloody get out of it, I would, you know. So that is her preference. She describes herself as wheelchair bound, and she likes to be how she's referred to. And the journalist said, no, I'm not going to, because they were too scared, because apparently that's not the correct thing to say. It's not okay, but that's how.
Yeah,
Carol was a bit upset about that.
Carol, I love Carol to death, and I'm glad you bring her up. She's a great example of how two people can have polar opposite views and opinions. She's a very dear friend and someone who I hold in very high regard. And her and I have very different views on language, and I respect her like you would not believe. But it's okay to have different views on language. You can still come together and share a glass of champagne.
Don't assume.
Okay.
Just check. Yeah. Don't assume. Just check.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Fabulous.
So
Thank
when
you.
I read a war on Twitter and social media and everything, it just does my head in.
Oh, it's awful. I tune right out of that stuff. I don't cope at all well with the outrage.
Yeah.
Culture, though. I mean, that's a whole different story. There probably needs to be a bit of it to get attention. I don't know. And some people, that's how they learn. But I get it. I don't deal with it well. I deal with it the way Sarah does, just gently. Yeah. And I think by the sounds of it, the way all of us do here. Now, one last question before we get on to a wrapping up, and I'm going to start with you, Sarah. I'm going to start with you because I think you work for the people who are the answer, one of the answers to this question. Who's doing it well? Who is doing disability journalism well? Now, I'm a massive ABC fan, have been ever since I was a child, and ABC, of course, have, for those of you who are not Australian and don't know, or are Australian and don't watch ABC, the fabulous NAS Campanella, who I have to say, in my experience growing up watching ABC, you know, I'm such a fangirl of Naz. She is aspirational. You get to see Naz and you think, I want to be. That's who I want to be. And now we're going to see Sarah Richards too on ABC and say, that's who I want to be. And there's also Kurt, and there is, you've got, and the ABC has disabled journalists reporting on and telling stories of things, all sorts of things, not necessarily disability. So certainly as a consumer, in my view, the ABC is someone who's doing it well. But you, Sarah, what do you think?
I would agree.
Who's doing it well?
I think, the ABC in Australia has been making a big effort for representation. I know in the morning show they have someone also in a wheelchair. He's from South Australia, and he's been doing segments for them as well. Yeah. So I think it's been really exciting to see that, and he's been doing stories not related to disabilities, and I think that's also a crucial thing, just that low levels of inclusion. Like, I work on the national news online, and I haven't really touched too many stories about people with disabilities. I've been doing all sorts of different things, same like any other producer. So I've been very grateful, and just how they're very cautious with how they are representing people and their voices that are being heard. It's just something that I know that they're very aware of and wanting to continue to improve on, because I don't think we'll ever achieve like utopia with it. So it's good to have organizations constantly being aware and wanting to improve on.
Absolutely. And I have to say, for those of you who don't know the ABC, they are funded by the government, so they're not commercial, which I think makes a difference. But also historically, ABC, you know, on Play School, they had, I've forgotten her name now, I loved her, but the lady on Play School who was deaf, and they're very good with, you know, they're good at inclusion, full stop. They've always been ahead of the game. It's not like, I don't feel that ABC has ever reacted to, you know, thinking, oh gosh, we need more, you know, diverse sexuality, we need more diverse, you know, people culturally, we need more diversity disability wise. I feel like that is actually all the way along for all different kinds of inclusiveness that ABC is built around that. It's very important to them. So I guess it's no wonder they're getting it right for disability, I guess is what I'm saying. They're not reacting to, wow, we have to include disability now. How do we do that? So that's what I see from the ABC. Charlotte, who do you think is getting it right?
Well, in the UK, I mean, I think with broadcasting, it's much easier for them to get it right because you're actually seeing the people on the screen. So we have a really great journalist here called Sean Dilley. He did Panorama, and now he's the Home Affairs correspondent for BBC. So he's actually, you know, he's absolutely brilliant. I think, yeah, the broadcasting are doing it really well, but I think I would actually say, as much as I love Sky, and I'm not going to be biased here, but I think the people who are doing it best that I have personally come across are the journalists who I've met in person and who I felt instantly accepted by. And I would say those journalists that I've come across in the UK are from newspapers. I don't know if it's in broadcasting, we're a bit more corporate and we're a bit more, you know, less time to chat. But I think when I was, you know, I was that annoying work experience kid. Do you know what I mean? And they just made me feel so welcome. You know, I was 16, 17, and they were just, I've never felt as accepted as I have in tabloid newspapers in particular, but newspapers in general. The Mirror, you know, absolutely fantastic, and the Telegraph and the Mail. But I think where that comes from is the people. If they are accepting of disabled people in their daily lives, in accepting work experience, school, teenagers, and also apprentices and graduates, I think if they're accepting, that's going to reflect in their journalism. So I think it really comes from the people who are behind it, really.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Charlotte. And you know, of course, it may not be outwardly obvious who's there may be organisations who are trying to get people in decision-making roles inside. You know, you know, just because you don't see disabled journalists at the forefront doesn't necessarily mean there's not good stuff going on behind the scenes, although it usually is reflected outwards, isn't it? You should be able to see it from the outside as well. Lisa, who's doing it well?
Well, it's already been mentioned, but ABC is doing a fantastic job. So I wish it wasn't such a short list, but unfortunately it is at the moment. With regard to mainstream media channels, it is the ABC, but hopefully we can come back to you in the near future with a much longer list. But yeah, there are a few more over here in Australia who are doing it well in fashion and places like that. But as a general rule, I think Nikki and I have spoken before about the fact that Australia tends to be a few years behind the likes of the UK and the America and places like that.
Yeah, interestingly, I tried to get somebody on this panel from the US, and I just could not quite find the right person. I couldn't find someone with a disability, and the people who I felt had a really good background who would, because I thought I actually really wanted somebody without a disability on the panel too, who was perhaps kind of quite high or been in the industry a long time. Yeah, that they felt uncomfortable that they shouldn't be speaking about it, wasn't their expertise. I thought, I really thought we'd have someone from America. So hopefully we will next year. I'm not a huge consumer of American journalism, so I don't know. I don't know who's doing it well in the States, but yeah. Thank you so much, ladies. Now, I guess to sum up, what I would absolutely love for us to think about is, over the next 12 months between now and next year's NAS, is there anything that, what is a key thing that is doable in 12 months that might actually make a difference, that we four can actually kind of maybe work together on, or put forward, or approach people with? Or is there some key thing that might be really, that might take this forward and make it a more impressive conversation, make it a longer list next year, not just the ABC, not just the ABC in the Mirror. Charlotte, what do you think would be, if you could suggest one key thing that the industry could do within the next 12 months?
I think I would say the biggest focus is editorial, really, to try and get more disabled. That doesn't have to be, the editor-in-chief, but different editors, whether it be a news editor, fashion editor, politics editor. I think it would be great on all publications, really, if they can start to think about, because I think it's not just, because I don't want this to be about just disability, about diversity, sorry, it's about merit and talent, but I think it could actually really enhance journalism and bring some fresh stories, especially with fashion. I think we could, if there was more fashion editors on women's magazines with disabilities, I think it could actually be quite huge. Actually, I think it could have a massive impact on young women with disabilities, their body image and their mental health. I think it could be really quite powerful. Oh, sorry, that's my phone.
Charlotte, you like to work?
No. Yeah, I think the focus really needs to be on editorial, personally.
Thanks, Charlotte. One of the key things that that can happen that will help spread from there. So you've validated someone who largely lives in a fashion bubble there, Charlotte. Thank you. That's really interesting feedback from a proper journalist.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I'll try.
Lisa, what do you think? Spread from there. So you've validated someone who largely lives in a fashion bubble there, Charlotte. Thank you. That's really interesting feedback from a proper journalist.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I'll try.
Lisa, what do you think?
Following on from what you were saying, having more representation in front of and behind the camera. So yes, we need more journalists in front of the camera. So I'll say you can't be what you can't see, but all the behind the scenes work that's done to put stories together, be the camera person, and all of the hundreds of things that go into making stories happen. So not just the anchor man or woman, but there's a lot of things that go into journalism other than the person writing the story. So looking at journalism more holistically in terms of how it can incorporate disability, because there are roles for disabled people that may not be perfect. Different disabilities. People sitting at a desk all day writing stories isn't perfect for certain disabilities and certain types of people. So I know Bus Stop Films down in Sydney. It's a film company, a production company, run entirely by people with intellectual disabilities. So look at incorporating those sorts of things into the production process. So that's my
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I'm all for that, as you know, Lisa. I'm all for there needs to be people with lived experience of disability making decisions. They need to be in decision-making roles because they're not at the moment, and that's really important. So kind of that idea of don't just interview us, don't just tell stories about us, do that, but have us deciding what stories to look at and tell and how and why, and there's huge value in that. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Sarah.
Kind of on the same line, I'd love to see more people with disabilities start studying journalism. I know from what from my observations and from the people I met, there wasn't anyone else in my cohort who was like me, and I did find that like a bit discouraging, like starting uni and not seeing anyone else. So I would love to see like more people like me, more diversity, because I'm being trained up to be in those positions, even if it's in communications and public relations as well, because that's really crucial.
Absolutely. I was actually going to ask you that right back at the beginning and got distracted. Were there any other disabled people in your cohort
that I met? Like I can't, because some people have invisible disabilities. So but anytime a student was doing a story about disability, my lecturers would go, "Oh, go ask Sarah. You can interview Sarah," every single time. So I was like featured in like maybe 5, 6 each semester. I was happy to do it because I got to sit down with the journalism students and go, "These are my rules, and this is how you interview people with disabilities." And so just so that they could have that experience, I was more than happy to do that. But it was just like, come on, surely there's someone else you can ask. But yeah.
Excellent, thanks. So there's kind of two really key things there. One is clearly have people with disability not just in front of the camera and having stories told about them, but the ones deciding, some decision makers and editors in particular, and editors of women's magazines in particular, and around women's health and sexuality. And more and students, more uni students, so incentives for uni students. All right, well, I being the little I love solution seeking. Being the little solution seeker I am, I'll send you an email with that in it and see what we can all do to encourage that in the next 12 months, because I'm sure we can put forward some voices to encourage those things. Thank you so much. Now, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, Sarah?
Just nothing in particular, just representation is important, and just to make sure that we continue to strive for more representation, I think.
Lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Charlotte?
Yeah, no, I would just echo that. I can't think of a better way to say it, really.
Yep. Lisa?
I'll second that, and that every individual has a responsibility, whether it's something you post on Instagram or the person you hire, or whatever you're doing. We all individually have a responsibility to make this a more inclusive society for disabled people.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, ladies, for joining me. This feels incredibly important to me, and I get very excited about the future of journalism. It's in good hands. Look at you all. Hello, Varija.
Thank you so much for brilliantly moderating this, Nikki. I think there were some brilliant takeaway points. Representation, of course, being number one in terms of journalism, and something what I'd spoken to Charlotte even earlier, it has to be also in front of the camera, why just behind? Secondly, I think the other brilliant point that Sarah brought out, that, media unfortunately has become so commercialized that they're just picking up stories that are more clickable and more shareable. And that is driving the narrative around disability, and in a very stereotypical way. And I think we need to go beyond that. And something what Lisa said, and something what you also said, is, in the fashion magazines and the editors, they need to bring out the real stories and have a greater representation of disability, because they are the people who are actually creating perceptions in that space. So thank you so much for this brilliant contribution. I hope a lot of people in the media and in the journalistic sphere are listening to this, and probably we've tickled a few brains. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. Thank you, Lisa and Sarah. I know it's late. You're probably starving and tired. Charlotte, thank you so much for getting up so early to do this. Have a great day today in your home office, and I will be in touch with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.